My name's Emma, and if you had asked me years ago, I would have told you I had the kind of life most people dream of. I married David not long after college. He was the kind of guy who could light up any room without trying, charming in that effortless way that made everyone stop and take notice. I fell fast, head over heels, convinced we were meant to build a beautiful life together. And for a while, it felt like we did. The early days of our marriage were full of laughter and big plans. We bought a piece of property just outside a small town, a place with wide open fields and enough space to feel free, to build something lasting. It was peaceful, a little slice of quiet away from the noise. I imagined us growing old there, raising a family, putting down roots, but somewhere along the way, something shifted. It wasn't one big thing, more like little moments piling up when I wasn't paying attention. David's job was always demanding, but over the years, it took more and more of him. Long hours, last-minute business trips, constant phone calls. At first, I didn't mind. I told myself it was temporary, that he was working hard for us, for the life we wanted. I kept the house running, took care of things, filled the space he left behind. I thought if I just stayed patient, he'd come back to me the way he used to. But as time passed, the empty spaces in our life started feeling heavier. We stopped having real conversations, the kind that stretched late into the night like we used to. Most days it was just surface-level talk. What's for dinner? How was your day? Small updates that barely scratched the surface. And after a while, even that started to feel strained. He'd come home tired, distracted, his mind still back at work. And me? I'd stopped trying to pull him back. I told myself it was fine, that I could handle things on my own. But deep down, I felt something hollow settling inside me. I don't think I realized how lonely I'd become. It crept in slowly, like a shadow stretching longer each day. I spent hours alone, walking the property, tending to the animals we kept. We had chickens, a few goats, and of course, our horse, Shadow. He was a strong black stallion, gentle but powerful, the kind of animal that seemed to sense things you didn't say out loud. David gave him to me on our 5th anniversary, one of those big gestures meant to show how much he cared. And I did care. I loved Shadow from the moment I met him. In those long days when David was gone, Shadow became my constant. I'd head out to the stable, brush him down, feed him, and just be there. It was quiet, simple, but comforting in a way I didn't expect. Over time, it became the part of the day I looked forward to most. There was no judgment, no expectation, just a calm, steady presence. I didn't have to pretend everything was fine around him. I could just exist. I found myself talking to him more and more. It started small, little comments, updates on my day. But before long, I realized I was pouring out things I hadn't told anyone, not even David. Fears, frustrations, all the things I kept bottled up inside. It sounds strange, I know. But when you're lonely long enough, you start clinging to whatever feels steady. And Shadow was steady. He was there, listening in his own quiet way, when it felt like no one else was. I didn't think much of it at first. It was just easier, simpler, to spend my evenings in the stable than trying to force conversation at a dinner table that felt emptier each night. David's absence wasn't just physical. It felt like he was slipping away piece by piece, and I didn't know how to reach him anymore. I convinced myself this was just how life worked. People got busy, marriages changed, and you found ways to fill the gaps. But what I didn't realize back then was how much those gaps had turned into a canyon between us. I kept telling myself I was fine, that I didn't need more. But in those quiet moments alone with Shadow, I think I knew the truth. I missed the version of us that used to laugh easily, that shared dreams late into the night. And the more I tried to ignore that ache, the heavier it felt. so I stayed out in the stable a little longer each evening, brushing Shadow's coat, whispering thoughts I couldn't seem to share with David. I didn't know how far gone things were. I didn't realize how much distance had built up, not until it all came to a head. But standing there day after day, feeling the silent stretch between me and the man I used to be so close to, I knew something had to give. I just wasn't ready yet to face how far I'd drifted from the life I thought we were building together. It's funny how sometimes the places or things you least expect end up giving you the comfort you didn't even realize you needed. That's what happened to me. I never thought I'd find my peace in a stable, brushing down a horse, talking to someone who couldn't talk back. But that's exactly what happened. After all those months, maybe even years, of feeling alone while David was away, the stable became my safe place without me meaning for it to. It wasn't always like that. When we first bought this property, I saw the land, the open sky, the animals we could keep. All of it felt like a dream. Something solid we could build together. And for a while, it felt like we were. We got the chickens, the goats, and then came Shadow. David gave me Shadow as a gift on our 5th anniversary, one of those grand gestures he was always good at. He knew I loved horses, always had. Shadow was everything you'd want in a horse. Strong, beautiful, calm. I remember the day he brought him home. I thought maybe it was a sign things would settle, that David and I would finally slow down and enjoy this life. But instead, David kept getting busier. And little by little, I found myself spending more time alone with Shadow than I ever spent with my husband. It started innocently enough. I'd head out to the stable in the mornings, make sure the animals were fed, give Shadow a good brush. Routine stuff. But over time, that routine started to stretch. I'd linger, finding little excuses to stay out there longer. Maybe it was because the stable was quiet in a way the house wasn't. The house felt like a reminder of what was missing. The empty dinner table, the unanswered conversations, the distance growing thicker every day. But in the stable, it was different. There was no pressure, no need to pretend. Just me, Shadow, and the sound of his hooves shifting softly on the straw. I didn't even realize when I started talking to him more. At first, it was small talk, like you might do with a pet. Simple things about the weather or what I had to do that day. But after a while, the words came out heavier. Thoughts I hadn't shared with anyone. I'd find myself venting, pouring out frustrations I hadn't even admitted to myself. How tired I was of being alone. How much I missed the connection David and I used to have. How invisible I felt in my own life. It felt ridiculous, talking like that to a horse. But Shadow never judged. He'd just stand there, calm and steady, his dark eyes watching me, like he understood more than he let on. Sometimes, when I was upset, he'd nudge me gently with his nose, and it felt like the closest thing to comfort I'd had in a long time. I knew it wasn't the same as talking to a person, but it became easier than trying to open up to David. Whenever he came home, he seemed distant, distracted, his head still full of work. Every time I thought about telling him how I was feeling, I'd hold back, afraid of being brushed off or making things worse. So instead, I'd keep it all bottled up until I couldn't anymore. And then I'd head to the stable and let it all out where no one could hear me but Shadow. It sounds silly when I say it out loud, but those quiet hours became the only place where I felt like I could breathe. I think part of me knew I was using the stable and Shadow as a way to avoid facing what was happening in my marriage. It felt safer to keep my feelings contained there, to focus on the rhythm of brushing his coat, feeding him, cleaning the stall. The simplicity of it kept me grounded in a way nothing else did. And when everything inside me felt tangled and complicated, that stable was the one place where things made sense. I didn't plan to rely on him so much. It just happened. The more distant David became, the more I found myself leaning into those moments with Shadow. I'd lose track of time, sometimes realizing the sun had set, and I'd spent hours out there without even noticing. It wasn't that I was trying to hide, it was more like I was trying to fill the silence David left behind. And somehow, without meaning to, I let myself get comfortable in that space. Comfortable enough that it started to feel like the only place I belonged. Looking back now, I realize how much of myself I'd poured into those quiet visits to the stable, how much weight I put on the shoulders of a horse simply because I didn't know where else to put it. And it wasn't until everything came to a head that I understood just how much I had come to rely on Shadow, not just for routine, but for something deeper, for connection, for comfort, for all the things I should have been sharing with David but didn't know how to anymore. It wasn't about Shadow, not really. It was about the loneliness I hadn't been able to admit to anyone, even myself. And by the time I finally saw how much that loneliness had shaped my days, it felt like I'd already built walls around myself so high that I didn't know how to take them down. I wish I could say I noticed right away when things crossed a line, but the truth is, it happened so slowly, I didn't even see it coming. One day, I was just spending time in the stable because it felt peaceful, and the next, I realized I was clinging to it in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't something I planned or something I thought much about. It just unfolded, little by little, until suddenly, I was standing there asking myself how I got so attached. I think part of me knew all along, but I pushed it to the back of my mind. It started out harmless enough. I was lonely. David was gone a lot. His work kept him busy, his focus somewhere far away from here. So when I spent time with Shadow, it felt easy, safe. There was no pressure to be anyone, no need to pretend. He was always there, quiet, steady, never judging. I didn't have to worry about whether I was saying the right thing or if I was burdening him with my feelings. I could just talk, and that's what I did, more and more. I'd catch myself out there longer every evening. What started as brushing down his coat or feeding him turned into me rambling about everything. How I felt like David and I barely knew each other anymore. How the house felt too big and too empty. How I didn't even recognize myself half the time. And Shadow, bless him, he'd just stand there, his big, calm eyes watching me like he understood every word. I told myself it was fine, that it wasn't hurting anyone. I mean, it's just a horse, right? But the thing is, the more I confided in him, the more it felt like he was the only one who really saw me. I stopped trying to talk to David about the things that mattered. It felt easier to hold it all in and let it out in the stable, where no one would judge, where I didn't have to worry about how it sounded. Slowly, without realizing it, I started relying on that connection in ways I shouldn't have. It's strange how emotions work like that. You think you're in control, that you're just coping, and then one day, you're standing there realizing you've blurred the lines. I started to feel guilty, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why at first. After all, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't crossing any obvious boundaries, at least not in the way most people would think. But emotionally, that's where it got murky. I was giving my energy, my thoughts, the vulnerable pieces of myself to something that wasn't my marriage. It hit me one evening when I found myself in the stable again after another phone call with David had left me feeling hollow. I was brushing Shadow's coat, my hands moving on autopilot, and suddenly I realized my heart was racing, not because of anything he did, but because of what I was feeling. It was like I had created this little world where it was just me and Shadow, and that world had started to feel more real, more comforting than the one waiting for me inside the house. I remember catching myself, shaking my head like I could snap out of it, telling myself it was ridiculous. He was a horse, nothing more. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about him. It was about me, about how I'd let myself disconnect from everything else, including David, and poured all of my emotions into something that couldn't ask anything back. It wasn't fair. Not to David, not to me, and certainly not to Shadow, who had no idea he'd become my emotional crutch. Still, no matter how many times I tried to pull back, I kept finding myself right back there. Every time things felt heavy or uncomfortable, every time I felt that ache of loneliness, it was easier to walk out to the stable than to sit across from my husband and say, "I'm not okay." I told myself I could handle it, that I had it under control. But the more I avoided facing the growing distance between me and David, the more tangled up I became in this quiet, strange attachment I'd built. It felt safe, but it wasn't real. Not the way relationships are supposed to be. I think part of me was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I actually sat down with David and told him how lost I felt. What if he didn't understand? What if he brushed it off? It felt less risky to keep everything locked away and pour my heart out to a horse who couldn't leave, couldn't argue, couldn't judge. But at the same time, I knew I was running from something I couldn't outrun forever. I knew, deep down, that I was leaning too hard on something that wasn't meant to carry that weight. And the worst part was realizing I didn't know how to stop. So I kept going, kept falling into the same routine, even though a little voice inside me whispered louder every day. This isn't where you're supposed to be. You need to turn around. You need to face what you're avoiding. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. So I stayed in the stable, whispering all the things I couldn't say out loud, hoping I could keep the walls from crumbling just a little while longer. I should have seen it coming. I think deep down, I knew it was bound to happen eventually. You can't keep living two separate lives under the same roof without something giving way. But when it finally did, it still caught me off guard. It happened on one of those evenings where everything felt routine. David had been gone for a few days on yet another trip. I'd had the usual quiet day, fed the animals, did a few chores, and then, as always, wandered out to the stable after the sun started sinking low. Shadow was there, like always, waiting patiently. I felt like the stable was the only place where the world didn't feel so heavy. So I went about my usual tasks, brushing him down, talking softly without thinking too much about what I was saying. It was easier that way, easier than facing whatever was waiting inside the house. I had gotten used to the rhythm, to the silence stretching around me. But what I didn't know was that David had come home early. No warning, no text, just drove up the long gravel driveway while I was still out there, lost in my little bubble. I didn't even hear the sound of his truck until it was too late. 1 minute, I was talking to Shadow, and the next, I felt a shift in the air. I turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway of the stable, eyes narrowed, arms crossed. His expression stopped me cold. For a split second, neither of us spoke. I could see the confusion in his face, the suspicion flickering just beneath it. He looked at me, then at Shadow, then back at me, like he was trying to make sense of whatever scene he'd just walked in on. The silence between us felt like it stretched for miles. And then, finally, his voice cut through it, sharp, uncertain. "Emma, what's going on?" I felt my stomach drop. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I didn't know what to say because, honestly, I didn't even fully understand it myself. How was I supposed to explain that I'd spent the last few months confiding in our horse instead of my own husband? That I'd been pouring my feelings out to an animal because it felt safer than risking another empty conversation with him? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. David took a step closer, his gaze still bouncing between me and Shadow. "I come home early, and I find you out here. What are you doing?" His voice wasn't angry yet, but there was something in it that made my chest tighten, like he was trying to hold something back. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I wanted to say something simple, something that would make it all go away. But the truth sat heavy on my tongue. I shook my head slightly, fumbling for words. "It's not what you think," I managed to whisper, though I wasn't even sure what he thought yet. He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Then tell me, because I come home, and you're out here whispering to Shadow like—" He trailed off, running a hand through his hair, frustration flickering in his eyes. "Like he's something more." I flinched at his words, feeling exposed in a way I hadn't prepared for. I could tell he wanted an answer, but how could I explain something I barely understood myself? I looked down at my hands, still resting gently on Shadow's side, and tried to steady my breathing. "David, you've been gone a lot," I said quietly, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "And I've been lonely." The word felt too small for everything swirling inside me, but it was all I could manage. His expression shifted, somewhere between confusion and hurt. "So you're out here talking to a horse?" he asked, shaking his head like he couldn't quite believe it. "Emma, he's a horse." His tone wasn't cruel, but it cut deep anyway. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "I know," I said softly, "but he's here. He's been here when you haven't." There was no accusation in my voice, just quiet truth. David stared at me, his jaw tight, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. The stable felt unbearably quiet, save for the occasional snort from Shadow, completely unaware of the tension hanging in the air. After what felt like forever, David spoke again, his voice lower now. "Is this what it's come to?" he asked. "That you'd rather be out here with him than talk to me?" I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "It's not that simple," I whispered. But maybe it was. Maybe it was exactly that simple. I'd found comfort in the one place where I didn't feel invisible, and now it was standing in stark contrast to the distance between me and my husband. David let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly, almost like he was asking himself. I felt something crack inside me at those words. "I tried," I said, my voice trembling. "But every time I brought it up, you were busy, distracted. It felt easier to just keep it in." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see something shift in his eyes. Not anger, not frustration, but something heavier. Maybe regret. Maybe realization. Neither of us knew what to say after that. We just stood there in the fading light, the air thick with everything we hadn't said for months. I could feel the weight of all the unspoken words, all the missed chances to fix what had been breaking quietly between us. And in that moment, standing face to face in the stable, I knew there was no hiding anymore. The truth was out, and we were both going to have to face it, whether we wanted to or not. I stood there in that stable, my hand resting lightly on Shadow's side, and everything felt like it had cracked wide open. The air between David and me was thick, heavy with all the things we hadn't been saying for so long. It wasn't just about that moment. Not really. It was about everything leading up to it, all the quiet days, the missed conversations, the way we'd drifted so far apart without even realizing it until now. I could feel David's eyes on me, searching, maybe trying to understand how we'd gotten here. But honestly, I wasn't sure I even knew how to explain it. I took a deep breath, the words sitting like stones in my throat, and finally forced myself to speak. "David," I said softly, almost afraid my voice might shake too much to get it out. I don't know how to explain this without sounding ridiculous. But the truth is, I've felt alone for a long time. He didn't say anything right away, just watched me, his expression unreadable. I looked down, feeling the weight of what I was about to admit settle hard in my chest. When you're gone so much, when you come home, but it feels like you're still somewhere else, I stopped knowing how to talk to you. I stopped knowing how to even reach you. My fingers fidgeted with the edge of Shadow's bridle, something to hold on to while I tried to find the right words. At first, it was little things. I'd wait up for you, but you'd come home late and too tired to talk. I'd try to bring up how I was feeling, but you always had something else on your mind. So after a while, I just stopped. I stopped trying. And that's when I started spending more time out here. I looked back up at him then, forcing myself to meet his eyes even though I felt raw, exposed. It was never about the horse, I said quietly. It was about me, about how lost I felt. Shadow didn't talk back, didn't brush me off. He was just there. And in a strange way, it felt easier to pour everything out here than to sit across from you and admit how lonely I'd become. David's face shifted slightly, like he wanted to say something, but was still trying to process it all. The silence stretched between us, almost unbearable. I pressed on, needing to get it out, to finally be honest after holding it in for too long. I know it sounds crazy, I added, shaking my head. I know talking to a horse isn't the same as talking to your husband. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like I could talk to you. I stopped feeling seen. My voice cracked at that, and I swallowed hard, trying to keep myself together. And it's not all on you, I admitted quietly. I didn't fight hard enough. I kept it inside because I didn't want to bother you, didn't want to sound needy or like I couldn't handle things. But I couldn't. Not really. I glanced away for a second, the sting of tears starting to build behind my eyes. I don't know when exactly I started shutting down. I just know that every time I reached out and felt like you weren't there, a little more of me pulled back. Until one day, it felt like I didn't know how to bridge the gap anymore. I paused, taking another shaky breath, feeling the enormity of it all pressing down on me. So, yeah, I said softly, almost with a sad laugh. I guess I did cross a line, not physically, but emotionally. I leaned on something else when I should have leaned on you, and I'm sorry. My voice cracked again on the last word, and I blinked back the tears that were threatening to spill. David finally stepped closer, his eyes softer now, no longer sharp with confusion or frustration, just something quieter, something heavier. Emma, he said, his voice low. I had no idea you felt this way. I nodded, brushing at my face with the back of my hand, embarrassed but relieved to finally be saying it. I know, I whispered. I didn't know how to tell you. He stood there for a moment, looking at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in months, maybe even years. He let out a slow breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentler. I thought I was doing everything I was supposed to, working hard, keeping everything running. I didn't realize how much I'd been gone, even when I was here. That admission hit something deep inside me, and I could feel a lump forming in my throat. I didn't want to bother you with it, I said quietly. You always seemed so busy, so focused. I figured maybe I just had to learn to handle it myself. His eyes softened even more, and he shook his head. I wish you'd told me, he murmured. I wish I'd seen it sooner. I felt like something inside me was breaking open in the best, scariest way. After all the pretending, after all the lonely nights spent holding everything in, here we finally were, standing face to face. No more hiding. I didn't want to lose you, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I think I lost myself along the way. David stepped closer, his hand reaching out tentatively, like he wasn't sure if he should, but needing to. He brushed his fingers against my arm, his touch light but steady. I don't want to lose you either, he said, his voice thick. We've both been lost, haven't we? I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my chest. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything we'd left unsaid for too long. And standing there, vulnerable, raw, I realized something important. This was the moment. The moment where the walls finally cracked and the truth came pouring out. It hurt, but it was real. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first step toward finding our way back. After all the truth spilled out that night in the stable, after everything I'd been holding in finally saw the light, something shifted between David and me. It wasn't some dramatic instant fix. We didn't suddenly fall back into the easy rhythm we used to have. But for the first time in what felt like forever, we weren't pretending anymore. The silence that had filled the house, the space between us, it felt different now. Not quite so heavy. Not quite so impenetrable. We stood there after all the words were out, him still brushing his fingers lightly over my arm, me trying to blink away the tears that just wouldn't stop coming. Neither of us knew what to say next. But in that moment, it was enough to just be standing there, together, without all the walls we'd both built. Eventually, he let out a long sigh and pulled me gently into a hug. Not tight, not rushed, just something quiet and steady. And I let myself lean into it, feeling how strange and familiar it felt all at once. I hadn't realized how long it had been since we'd touched without feeling like strangers. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. I don't want to keep going like this, Emma, he said, his chin resting lightly on the top of my head. I don't want us to keep drifting. I nodded into his chest, unable to get any words out yet. But in my heart, I knew the same thing. Something had to change. We couldn't keep living like two people who shared a house but not a life. After a while, we stepped back, and I could see the same exhaustion in his face that I felt inside. It wasn't just the weight of that night. It was everything that had built up over years. And yet, under all of that, there was something else too. Something like determination. We walked back toward the house without speaking much more, but something unspoken passed between us, an understanding that things couldn't stay the same, and neither of us wanted them to. The next morning felt different, not perfect, just lighter, maybe. David didn't rush off like usual. He lingered over coffee, actually asked how I slept. I could tell he wasn't used to it either. He seemed awkward, unsure, but he was trying, and that meant more to me than he probably realized. Later that day, we sat down, just the two of us, no distractions. No TV on, no phones buzzing. Just us at the kitchen table, facing each other. It felt strange at first, like we were trying to learn how to talk all over again. But slowly, little by little, the words came. We talked about everything, not just about me and Shadow, not just about the loneliness, but about the years in between, the missed moments, the assumptions we'd both made, how easy it had been to fall into routines that left no room for each other. I told him how I'd felt invisible, like I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. And he listened, really listened. No rushing, no brushing me off. He told me how much pressure he'd been putting on himself, thinking if he worked harder, provided more, it would somehow make everything okay. How he hadn't realized how far away that had taken him from me. It wasn't one magical conversation that fixed it all, but it was the start of something. For once, We both laid it all bare, no holding back. And when the words ran out, he reached across the table and took my hand, just held it, not saying anything. But I could feel everything in that gesture. I knew it wouldn't be easy. We had years of distance to work through, habits to unlearn. But something inside me shifted that day. I realized that fixing us wasn't about grand gestures or sudden change. It was about small choices, choosing to sit down and talk instead of walking away, choosing to stay present instead of hiding in silence. We made a decision that day, not some big dramatic vow, but a quiet one. We'd check in more, really check in. Even when it felt awkward or hard, we'd find little ways to reconnect piece by piece. It started small, sitting together in the evenings instead of retreating to separate corners of the house, eating dinner at the table without distractions. I'd still go out to the stable, of course. Shadow was still a part of my life. But now I'd invite David to come too. Sometimes he'd join me, other times not. But the difference was, we both stopped pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Slowly, it felt like the walls started to come down, brick by brick. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when old habits crept back in, when it felt easier to fall into silence. But we'd catch ourselves now. One of us would say something, reach out, pull the other back before the distance could creep in again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real felt like enough. I think the biggest shift happened inside me. For so long, I'd convinced myself that I had to be fine, that I shouldn't need more, that needing something from David somehow made me weak or needy. But what I've come to understand is that wanting connection, wanting to feel seen and loved, isn't a flaw. It's what relationships are built on. And now, I finally felt like I could ask for that without shame. Little by little, we started finding each other again. It didn't feel like going back to who we used to be. More like learning who we were now after everything. Rediscovering what made us strong, what made us want to keep choosing each other day after day. And in the quiet of those small moments, the shared glances, the honest conversations, the simple act of reaching for his hand across the table, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we'd find our way forward together.